All right, you all. So peace and blessings. Super excited for the conversation today. A profound conversation is what we are actually hoping for. And in the context of this conversation today, we are focusing on what does it mean to be a part of and to build a culture of care across Black and Brown communities, especially with mental health and healing at the center of this conversation, which all too often we spend a lot of time in sort of, obviously speaking about the trauma of it all, but necessarily not enough time around the health aspects, the optimal health aspects, and again, the healing of it all, which we know has got to be at the center of anything as it pertains to Black folks winning in this country. I will also say, just by way of framing, that again, for me, this conversation is but one of many that I like to think of as essential components of Black liberation as we talk about, again, how we move as a people, right? Because we know we have pockets of success, right? But how do we move holistically, right? Because when one of us is not liberated, then none of us are truly. But how do we move with this thought around examining these really, really critical components of Black liberation? And again, we know mental health and healing is really critical to that. The only additional framing that I will offer, again, as a navigator, I didn't introduce myself, but my name is Sadiq Ali. It's my pleasure to be a part of this conversation this evening, is that as part of one of our prep conversations, I'm going to shout out our big bro, who you will hear from here in a moment, Baba Richard Rowe, who I have the pleasure of working closely with on several projects, and another Baltimore brother by way of the D. Yeah, if you know, you know. But in our prep call, again, just so grateful for you and the energy that you brought. But I am grateful, but I will also admit that I was also ashamed that I was not familiar with the legacy and the career and the work of Dr. Barbara Sizemore, right? Who, if you're not familiar with her, some of your first pieces of homework as you walk out of here, listener, to this conversation, to go and immediately research and get a copy of her book, Walking in Circles. But I was blown away I've been blown away as I've started reading that book. But Baba Richard, during that prep call, as you referenced Dr. Sizemore, you shared a quote with her that I want to share with our esteemed guests this evening, as well as our viewers. You put words with this quote to how I know I have felt personally, and how I know for a fact many of us have felt in engaging in conversations similar, and hopefully it'll be dissimilar to this conversation we had tonight, but y'all know what I mean. And that quote was essentially that in so many of our conversations, dialogues, and panels, etc., we find ourselves spending 90% of the time on problems, 5% on causation, 5% of solutions, and 0% on implementation. Again, just blown away. And again, the work of Dr. Sizemore is profound, especially as a DC native. I'm even more ashamed, so now I'm really telling on myself. So I offer that as additional framing to say that one of our primary goals and objectives of this conversation today is to really invert that paradigm, and for us to spend the proper, in our humble opinion, the proper amount of time on causation, solutions, and implementation. Because I think at this point, a lot of us are probably already familiar with what the issues are, right? What the problems are. Millions of pages have been written on what the problems are. Now, the danger, obviously, not spending enough time on problems is that, as Davon talks about, and you all will hear from him, it leads to some of us having the opportunity to pathologize Black folks and to think that something is inherently wrong with us when we don't provide the proper context. But when we go too far askew, then we don't get any time spent on how we actually dig ourselves out of this collective miserable position that too often we find ourselves in. So this is a razor's edge, y'all. We're going to do our best to walk it in a short amount of time and to plant some seeds for the future. But I'm just really, really excited for us to get going in the conversation. And with that, we're going to jump right in. We have some questions for our esteemed conversationalists this evening. And as each one of you all answer your first question of the session, that you would just give a quick introduction, who you are, where you're based, maybe one or two sentences about your work, and then we'll just jump right in if everybody's good with that. Okay. Um, So this first question, I really want to again just do some additional grounding and framing and level setting, especially with that thought around mental health and healing being again part of the essential components of Black liberation, of which there are many, but there are some that we know are essential. I would love to hear from each one of you all again alongside your super brief intro, but what would you all say would be two to three additional essential components of Black liberation in America? Obviously, again, keeping in mind that we're a part of a global African diaspora, but also knowing that we have to start somewhere. So, alongside mental health and healing, what would you all say are additional two to three additional components that you all would deem essential to Black liberation in this country? And I will toss it to I'm gonna toss it to Bob and Richard to get us started because I know you're gonna start us with the right energy.
Thank you, Brother Sadiq. Powerful question for a powerful session. My name again is Richard Rowe. I am a senior consultant for the Black Mental Health Alliance, which is located in Baltimore, Maryland. We are entering our 40th year of doing work on the ground around issues that pertain to our mental health and well-being as individuals, as families, and as a people. Given our history in this country, as we all know, and don't need to really belabor the point in terms of how we got here, but we were kidnapped, we were brought here, and we have lived under a system of white supremacy and structural racism forever. And trying to navigate through that system and those systems and policies and practices, it has been a challenge, to say the least. But our organization tries to, again, identify and select culturally competent, culturally responsive mental health professionals that can address our trauma, that can address our dehumanization, that can address our marginalization, our demonization, our criminalization that has been exacted against us, our people, again, for the past 400 plus years. And so while our organization by itself cannot do it all, we team up and partner with other organizations. Some of them are on this screen with us in this webinar, and we have been fortunate to link up with brothers Kareem and Samuel, who part of the Muslim Life Planning Institute, and we're fortunate to really be a partner with them as well to advance this work and to elevate this work. So I'm glad to be on this webinar with all of you all who I've heard great things about and who I've met in some earlier sessions. But to try to get to your question, Brother Sadiq, and again, there's so much that one could say about additional components that would be important for us to that are essential for Black liberation. I would share probably one or two that I think is critical, that we have to make certain that we are clear about the goal of where it is that we really want to end up. And we have been struggling with the goal for quite some time. Is it integration? Is it nationalism? Is it assimilation? Is it integration? So we've been struggling with the question of where to. And how, if we could address that question as a collective, it makes it easier for us to then determine how to get there. But if we're not clear about where we're going and why we need to get there and why it's important for us to embrace the goal as a collective, then we will continue, be on the treadmill of constantly spinning our wheels and trying to figure out why we can't come together. So I think there's a need to really be clear about the goal. There are components to the goal that needs to be determined, and those are goals that are related to our social economic well-being, our spiritual well-being, our psychological well-being, and all of those critical pieces of the puzzle are critical for the liberation of our people. And then if we can address some of those critical elements, then I think it's incumbent upon us to really do what? Connect the dots that we have talked about, but have been very challenged by being unable. Now, a lot of that is a result of being the programming. So the programming says to our people, you can't do it. You can't do it on your own. You have to depend on us. You have to wait for the oppressor to basically liberate you. So we have been basically program oriented and given this kind of uh, need to really be dependent on others to do for us what we must do for ourselves. So we've got to basically be clear about the goal, understand the importance of connecting the dots, be clear about where we're headed, where we're going, and come together as a people, as a collective, in the best way possible to really elevate ourselves and to move our agenda. So I'll stop there and let others chime in.
No, thank you, Baba Richard. And as I knew you would start us off right, I think it's an incredibly powerful point, and I want to put a pin in it because again, as always, you've given me a lot to think about. That's a big, it's a big task that you've just given us, and is it possible for us to agree? It's sort of one part follow up, right? We're gonna come back to this. Uh, if so, how? If not, what are again are the essential components that we can agree upon that allows us to sort of have that springboard to the future. But I invite, let's go, Sister Hazel, jump in. Give us a little bit about your background, tiny bit, and then what would you say some additional components are again for Black liberation in this country for us?
I'm Hazel Taylor Smith. I am a psychiatric clinical nurse specialist and nurse practitioner. I'm based in Shreveport, Louisiana. That is a very powerful question, and I do appreciate the answer. From a mental health background, what I see, what I know, what I've experienced is dispelling myths. It's how we so believe what's been told to us. I see that we need to dispel those myths individually and from a familiar point, family, so that we can actually recognize our own self-empowerment.
I love it. I love it. Dr. Anissa.
That's so interesting. Thank you, Sister Hazel. My name is Anissa Nadir, and I'm in Phoenix, Arizona area. I am the CEO of Dr. Anissa Nadir and Associates. One of our we have two institutes, the Social Justice Institute and the Before the Nikah or Before You Get Married Institute. I also serve as the president of the Islamic Social Services Association, which is a nonprofit that I'm so excited to say turns 25 next year. We're focused on mental health education and advocacy. And wow, following up, Sister Hazel, as you were speaking, my head was going, I was just shaking. So yes, I so agree that we really need to build strong and healthy families. I think that's a really big part. One of the things we know historically is that throughout our history, our families have been pulled apart. As much as and even significantly with even all of that, we've tried to hold together. We've done our work and have been doing our best to hold together, but I think we need some tools that we don't have, or that we haven't had, at least generally speaking. Some do, but not enough of us. And so I think that strong, healthy families, which begin with strong, healthy marriages or those lifelong relationships, I think those are key. And those are have at its foundation a strong faith. So, strong faith with a strong, healthy marriage relationship, which builds strong families, which leads to strong communities. I think that's going to be really important, and that we look at it from the strengths that we have, historically supported one another. And, we've been there even through thick and thin, even with all the challenges that we've had. And so I think that's going to be really important for um, liberation, for true liberation.
Oh man, we heating up already. We warming up already. Ah man, you taking us there already, Dr. Anissa. This idea of family, this idea of strong unions, right? Our marriages, and you said something there at the end that again we don't spend enough time, right? We can even add that edit to Dr. Sizemore's quote, spending the requisite and the appropriate amount of time on assets, knowing that we've never started from square zero. We have so much rich history and so many assets and tools to pull from that we've either forgotten, they've fallen out of favor, or they were intentionally taken from us so as to have us forget them. Is such an important point. So again, for sure, we're gonna come back to that point. But thank you for setting the table on that one, brother Davon. Jump in.
So, greetings once again. I'm Davon Love, Director of Public Policy, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, grassroots think tank, political advocacy organization with a revolutionary Pan-African nationalist perspective. And so to dovetail into kind of just my initial remarks as it relates to the question, worldview is really important. And I think sometimes we take worldview for granted. Hubert Henry Harrison, in his book Negro in the Nation, and it's a quote that I cite a lot because I think it does a good job of really helping people understand the terrain of which we're operating, where he says the difference between Black people prior to the Civil War and post the Civil War: chattel slavery, wage slavery. Chattel slavery enforced by brute force, wage slavery enforced by starvation. And that latter part, where the plantation structure of the political economy of the United States, right, that plantation structure still persists today, right? But those that are the owners of the means of production in the society are able to use starvation as the mechanism for control. And I think a part of what happens to Baba Richard's point around the conversation regarding integration or nationalism, I think a part of what happens is that we, in many ways, have normalized the plantation, right? There's a way that the plantation structure of this society is rendered inevitable. And so we spend most of our time thinking about how to more effectively navigate the plantation, right? Again, as a metaphor, as opposed to what it would mean to operate as a sovereign people outside of a plantation context. And part of the challenge is that many of us have not imagined a world outside of the plantation, because when you think about the collective consciousness that just Americans in general are imbued with, is so colonized. Like, many people have not encountered histories or narratives, particularly of people of African descent, that have been able to experience the world outside of a colonial context. And that kind of, as John Henrik Clarke once said, colonization wasn't just domination of land and territory in the world, but information about the world. So it's like many of us can't even think the thoughts we need to think in order to contemplate freedom, right? And I think that that's particularly important in thinking, and it kind of where I'll land this for now is that there's a way that, because of how the plantation is rendered inevitable in our collective consciousness, that survival is something that we should honor, because people who survive the violence of the plantation, that should be honored. But we often confuse that with liberation, right? And we should be able to do both, where we can honor the fact that there are people who have survived the plantation, people who are currently in a plantation context that are doing the best they can at surviving it, and doing the best they can in the context of it, but making the important distinction between those that are engaged in survival tactics and those that are engaged in liberation, and connecting it to mental health. I think there is a way that being in that survival context is crazy making, right? And there are ways that the kind of crazy making that the plantation normalized is something that is often attributed to Black people. Just there's just something wrong with us, right? We don't know how to come together, right? So those things are projected onto things as if they're inherent to Black people, as opposed to the fact that the plantation structure is not something that human beings that are honoring themselves should subject ourselves to, right? And so I think from a mental health perspective, even thinking about, what is the impact as prisoners of war, which essentially people of African descent are, right? As prisoners of war, right? We should start there with the fact that all of our people aren't crazy and dysfunctional, right, is an accomplishment and miracle in and of itself. And that if we're serious about any kind of mental health that is meaningful, then any intervention should start from the vantage point of recognizing our position in this society as prisoners of war, right? And go from there. Because I find that there are many, even when we talk about young people and interventions with young people dealing with their mental health, there's a total lack of acknowledgement of the dehumanization that they are subject to on a day-to-day basis by pop culture, policies, etc. So again, I would just say, in terms of connecting Black liberation and the conversation about mental health, the intervention should be grounded in an acknowledgement of the true reality that we exist in. And I would argue that it is those kinds of interventions that have produced the greatest benefit to our community. And to the point that I think you made earlier, Sadiq, is that a lot of that work is marginalized. So our work is to put it in the hands of our people to see that approach actually is more impactful than the stuff that is imposed on us or projected onto us.
I agree with that. It's like with my
Come
clients,
on.
what impacts how you see yourself? And it's the dehumanization, it's the past lies, it's who are you? What do you see when you look at you? And it's through someone else's eyes and not through the eyes of the individual who's speaking.
1,000 yeses. 1,000 yeses to both. All of that, Davon. And thank you, Sister Hazel. Davon, I'm going to stay with you for a second, right? Because I told you, we're not going to spend the whole convo on this. But Davon, you already set the table for this as well. You and I have had many, many conversations about us spending, in many, many conversations in circles, a disproportionate amount of time talking about white people, white folks, what they do, what they think. So I would like to frame a familiar question, but in a different way, right? Because oftentimes, again, this is part of the problem framing. Like, oh, how did we get here? There's a lot been written about how we got here, y'all. But I was really, really inspired recently, and I shared this with, I think, Baba Richard and you, Davon. And again, this is to our audience members. The most recent biography written on Malcolm X, The Dead Are Arising. Absolutely phenomenal, written by Les Payne, released posthumously by Les Payne. The research and the book was completed by his daughter, Tamara Payne. But literally one of the opening quotes of the book is, Brother Malcolm, as he took from the nation, right? This idea that Black folks, first and foremost, we got to change ourselves. We got to change our minds about ourselves and about each other. And I think, Sister Hazel, that's where you're going. Davon, you and I have talked about this. Like, I don't know if we're going to change a lot of white folks' minds. And quite frankly, I don't even know if that's work worth doing. I don't really put a lot of stock in that, with all due respect, what I'm saying, to our white allies. So I say all that to say, Davon, in your thoughts and your framing, what would you say is important for Black folks to know about the global system of white supremacy and how it's impacted our lives, especially from a socioeconomic and overall well-being lens, which again, I think you touched on some of that just now from a mental health perspective. But if you're talking to a room full of Black folks that don't know nothing about why we are, how we got here, et cetera, what would you want them to know or us to know about as Black folks about the system of global white supremacy and, again, its impacts on us today?
Yeah, one of the things that I would focus on is this concept of historiography. So there's like history, like just information about what has happened. There's historicity, which is like our personal relationship to the forward flow of history. But historiography is about like which narratives are we most exposed to, and how does it impact how we formulate solutions to problems. I would argue that the dominant historiography that Black people are exposed to is a historiography that essentially is this narrative. To the extent that Black people have made progress in the society has been our ability to petition white people to recognize our humanity, right? That is the central narrative of the historiography that is central to U.S. pop culture, to traditional academic scholarship on the matter. It is that historiography. And I would start with undoing that and saying that that historiography is one that in and of itself perpetuates the global system of white supremacy. Because then once you undo that, then you have to start talking about the Haitian Revolution, right? And Boukman and Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and about how it was the Haitian Revolution, along with the rebellions of enslaved Africans, that put pressure on the United States, particularly the American North, who by this time had a more industrial economy, right? So it became less in the interest of the North, right, to support chattel slavery. The South, being an agricultural economy, was dependent on it, which is why they held on to it, right? And it became strategic for the American North to say no more, no more, chattel slavery, because and in fact, I remember finding um, it's a compilation of essays, a sister named Joanne Grant, who found a lecture in 1850 or so by the American Christian Women's Society, pleading with Northern Christian women, pleading with the American South, could you all please give up chattel slavery? These people are going to rebel against us, right? So just the thought of understanding that, Haitian Revolution, Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, right? Along with the Negro Convention movement, people like Henry Highland Garnett, the Negro Convention movement of the 1840s, right? Where they actually called on their quote unquote brethren in the South to raise up in arms against the American nation state, against enslavement. So we freed ourselves from chattel slavery, and then that doesn't include what brother Earl Henderson, his book, the Revolution Will Not Be Theorized, very recent book, where he argues that Black people made a strategic choice in the American Civil War for Black people to join the Union Army, not as allegiance to the Union Army, but as a strategic way to deny the South of its labor, to weaken it, right? As a way to chart their own freedom. So all these are narratives as to how Black we freed ourselves, right? And I would start there, because then all the solutions that then get framed from changing that historiography then has to focus on, oh, what actually works is that when Black people organize ourselves on the basis of our own freedom and self-determination, that's how we got free. Even when you think about, now end on this part, even when you think about the mid 20th century, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, we're taught that the civil rights movement and particularly the Civil Rights Acts, the 64 public accommodations, Voting Rights Acts, were like central to progress that has been made, right? And that's often associated with King and the Civil Rights Movement, the Big Six, CORE, SCLC, NAACP, et cetera, Urban League. The reality is that to the extent that Black people have made any progress, I would argue it's most attributed to the Voting Rights Act of 65, right? Which had some folks of the integrationist wing, but also much more folks of the nationalist wing of our movement, right? You look at Fannie Lou Hamer, who's characterized as a part of the civil rights movement, but she walked away from the civil rights movement and started doing work around nation building, like building co-ops around self-determination. Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, right? And the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, right? that, and to the extent that Black people have been able, now it hasn't been a panacea, but to the extent that Black people are able to exercise any kind of power, right, has been the Voting Rights Act, of which even Dr. King himself said the rationale in going from the Public Accommodations Act, where Lyndon Johnson says that's enough, we've done plenty, we don't have the political capital to do more. And King says, we don't want to rely on the goodwill of white folks. We have these majority Black jurisdictions in the South. If we can get them the vote, then we don't have to worry about whether white people are going to give us justice. They can just do it themselves. We can just do it ourselves, right? And so I just emphasizing that historiography, it helps us then talk about solutions in a way where we're not focused so much. And I hear people who are friends of mine who I think mean well, for whom so much of that conversation is like, we just got to get some of these white people to see what we're saying and to understand what we're trying to do and to get them on our side and see how their interests converge with ours. And what I always say is like, that isn't how we have made progress, but the historiography we've gotten encourages that thinking.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I mean, powerful summation, Davon. I mean, in terms of just elements of or knowledge of our history in the front, on the front page of The Destruction of Black Civilization, Dr. Chancellor Williams says, what happened to the people of Sumner? And he basically concludes from the historian who raises that question that they lost their history, they forgot their history, and they died. So again, you know, if a people have been rendered to be ahistorical, they don't know, again, what you've just shared, Davon, or what Dr. John Henry Clark and those other great historians and sociologists, Dr. Du Bois and many others that we could list here. If we don't have a clear understanding of our history, then we're forever running again or adhering to the history of others and their solutions and their blueprints or their playbook. We are constantly trying our best to use plays that or trying to really move our needle or move our people to nation building, but in service of what? White domination. Most of our solutions, most of our pursuit for our people end up being, because we can't differentiate between progress and power and all of that, we end up basically spending so too much of our time preoccupied with trying to do what? To serve our master or to serve the oppressor. And so most of our efforts end up being, one could draw the conclusion that most of our efforts, and this is the mental health conundrum, a people who heal are healed, and people who understand what has happened to them can basically move from that kind of dependency on others to dictate and determine how they should operate, decisions they make, who they should connect with, who they should basically, work with, and so forth. That's been our conundrum, because again, we have not understood totally our history, and as a result, we are constantly basically, moving about, doing the work of doing the bidding of our oppressor and not doing our work. There's a need for us to do our work, and our work entails so many things that we should spend most of our time, spending our time on doing our work. And we could talk about that, because that ultimately is what I think Sadiq is hoping we will get to. What is our work then? And we've talked about some of that.
Stay right there, Baba Richard. I'm gonna stay with you as a matter of fact, because again, you open this door. We're gonna start to mosey on through it. This idea of, and I think it really merges that latter point of yours and some of the points of Davon around what we believe about ourselves. And again, if the healers in our community and outside of our community are operating from this same false narrative, this same false historiography, etc., we got no choice but to continue to duplicate some of these false narratives. So my question to you, Baba Richard, is like, from a healer perspective, from a mental health professional perspective, what can our social workers, our practitioners, and I'm going to offer the same question to you in a moment as well, Dr. Anissa, but in what ways can our mental health professionals, or even the institutions who are training these healers enhance their understanding, their cultural competence, their really their cultural empathy, even to better serve the unique needs, right? With that prisoner of war framing. But how can these folks be trained better, be more acclimatized to serve the unique needs of Black folks in this country?
Mm. A question that is posed often is what is the worst thing that could have happened to Black people? I don't, just hopefully this is related to your question, Brother Sadiq. And I generally respond, it's not just me, but some others respond, that integration could have been perceived as the worst thing that happened to us. Prior to integration, we felt that we had to do it ourselves. We felt that we could do it ourselves. We had Black teachers, Black principals, we had Black social workers, sociologists. Everybody basically had developed a mindset that was more geared to serve our people and to build institutions, that life-saving, life-giving institutions. Prior to integration, integration, if that is true, and then we could debate that. I would have, concluded that maybe the best thing that the option that we should have maybe considered was not integration, Sadiq and others, but maybe infiltration. Infiltration suggests that you go in, you get what you need, you take what you need, you bring it back to your community and serve your community. Integration basically says you go into white America, you basically believe that they have all the answers, the solutions, and you adopt their solutions and their ideas and so forth. So if that's the worst thing that could have happened to us, and again, we could debate whether or not that's true or not. I think that there is some element of truth to how we ended up as a result of 1954 decision and what happened at 1954 decision, Brown versus Board of Education. We lost principals, we lost, teachers, we lost administrators who were steeped in a kind of a Black kind of agenda setting. They had a kind of understanding of where we wanted to go as a community and as a people. And we basically veered off, from adopting a kind of a paradigm that would allow us to really continue to build strong families and strong communities based on what we believe that entailed and what that meant. So again, I just think that, and I'll just use this powerful book written in 1933, which I think sums up, again, a lot of what I'm sharing with you all, and that's Dr. Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro. That basically sums it up. If you are miseducated, if you believe that somebody else's education is more important than yours, then in his powerful quote, he says you don't basically, have to be sent to the back door. You will basically make one. And I think for many of us, we are still trying to make the back door in America because we don't see ourselves building our own house, building our own institutions. And I'll say this, it might be controversial, but we have 106 Black HBCUs. 106 HBCUs, many of them 100 years plus old. And one would have to question Sadiq, Devon, and others, have they been able to live up to their mission of creating the kind of individuals leaving those institutions, as Dr. Du Bois called them, the talented 10th? Have they lived up to his notion of what the talented 10 should be about? Using that information to come back to free the 90% that have been left behind. So a lot of that, kind of understanding of where we are and who we are and building those kind of institutions, I think, are critical in order for us to really advance and to create the kind of healers that we need. Dr. Naim Akbar says in one of his books, I was taught at the University of Michigan to do what? To diagnose white rats, white people. Everything white, but nothing Black. It wasn't until he really joined the Nation of Islam where he got an introduction into, again, an appreciation, understanding of who he was and what he was all about, did he understand, again, what his mission, what his goals ought to be. But again, we have to really understand, our assets, institutions, colleges, churches, all these different institutions that have to be in sync and have to understand what their goals and missions are in order to serve our people at the highest level.
I think it is incumbent upon me to teach my colleagues that my clients have symptoms and not flaws. It is up to me to teach, to show, to correct lovingly. Uh, I mean, even today, you think as far as mental health is gone, and with all the new writings and new therapies, it is that individual that choose to see character flaws, which we all have, but our clients are there to be treated for symptoms. So it is a matter of education. Even when health fairs are done, health fairs are basically medical health fairs. When I do health fairs, there is a mental health component to it, and it's really interesting how it's not pressed upon them. It may be a table set up with self assessments, and I did one a couple of months ago, just young Black men. Um, I'm talking about things. I'm doing like, how are you with anger? And I know I'm kind of switching the subject a little bit, but this young man says, I don't have an anger problem. He said, my friend does. And then he goes to get his friend who, we kind of did the assessment, and it wasn't, it was just very casual communication as an elderly lady, mother, to young man. And that was the second time. So they came back a third time. And then I told them about a program I work with and how they're free to interact, the best kept secret in the world, and taking care of them, that kind of thing. But I think we have to put it out there. And then we have to put it out there to the ones who don't know it's out there, and correct the ones that know it's out there and say, that's not correct. I remember a psychiatrist, and almost got in trouble with this one, wrote on a lady's chart that she was psychotic, that her hair was asymmetrical. At the time, that was the style, asymmetrical hairdos. So that was not worthy of writing in her chart. And you kind of have to just say, what is and what is not, whether it's liked or not. But I think it's incumbent upon the providers that know more to do it differently. And that's to educate.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Hazel. Um, Education certainly is key. I'm very much a believer in prevention, and to come from a preventive, holistic perspective rather than a treatment. I think we've spent a lot of time on treating the problem, when I believe strongly that if we had the tools, if we knew the tools, if we used the tools, we could prevent the problem. And so I think that that's really key. Yeah, yeah. I'm and coming from a family. My parents had their marital issues, for instance, and they what I came to learn as I got older was they didn't have the tools. They didn't know certain things because of what had gone on historically, and where they grew up as young adults, they were right in the midst. I was born in '56, so 2 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Um, so they were right in the midst of what was happening, the struggle. Okay, and this the mental health um, tools that they needed, the relationship building tools that they needed, they didn't have. And the other thing is, the message kept being, we started in slavery. We didn't start in slavery. I think one of the things that really needs to do is we need to go back to the tools that we had in Africa, the family support system that we were pulled and torn away from, that we were kidnapped from. And I think we need to go back and look at what those tools were. And I think the question you asked is, what do we need to teach social workers? We need to help them know we didn't just get here. We didn't, like our point of arrival was not 1619. I mean, it was 1619 here, but we go way back. And we have tools, we have a history, we have civilization, we have so much that that was pulled from us. But those are the things that we need to regain, and that they need to know that's part of us. Okay, it's still historically part of us. Okay, and so I think that that's really important. I think as I hear the conversation, one of the things that I've been working on also is intergenerational connections. I am really very proud to be here, and to be here with you all, as being an elder with and hearing you. So I spend a lot of time with my children, and I suspect they're around your ages. And it's so amazing. I grew up in a time where, and I'm still working on getting some of those messages out of my head. You know, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good, but I still got some stuff that I'm like, oh, shoot, no, you're right. And they call me on it. And I'm so happy that I raised them so that they can call me on it. And they took it from there. I started them, they're amazing. So I got them started, and then they went forth and they like, no, mom, we're past that. This is the message. We need to reframe that message. And because I had already told them we needed to reframe the message, but now I'm learning how to reframe the message because from them. And so I think we make a mistake when we think as young people, we don't listen to the elders, and as elders, we don't listen to the young people. I think we need to have more of an intergenerational connection. Yeah, and valuing of one another. I think those things are going to be really important. I think those, for our mental health perspective, for us to be able to resolve some of the issues. One of the things I work a lot with, and perhaps many of you know about the ACEs studies. There was a study done by Kaiser Permanente, and it kind of pointed to, having had some of these different adverse childhood experiences, it causes some problems, But one of the things we also know is that if you know them yourself, and in my course, in my institute, we talk about to thine own self be true. So know yourself and be true, but then get the skills to help yourself, which we can do. I think that makes a difference. We don't need to sit and rest in, oh, woe is us. Okay, this happened. Now what are we going to do about it? So those are just some of the thoughts that I think that I have. I love the thought about Brother Richard, build our own house. When the pandemic hit, and even in 2008 when people were out of job, it was like sitting like, what was me? I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm like, you got skills, especially for many of us who got to go to school to any degree. We have skills, but we're not using them. And so we need to use the skills from an economic standpoint, but also from a family life standpoint. We have skills. We have skills that take us back into for generations and generations. We got to bring them and use them.
No, I love this. Now, y'all taking the convo in exactly the place where it needs to go. And I do want to shout out Dr. Nisa. I think you are 1 year younger. You'd be 1 year younger than my mom, my Umi. So, shout out. And I think you are spot on from an intergenerational perspective. One of the things, right, we talk about that culture of care, right, just sort of keeping that theme top of mind. And again, alongside those essential components for liberation is that we've sort of grown up in this country to think that there's something wrong with you if I'm a grown man and I live with my mother, then maybe. But if my mother lives with me, that's great. And that's sort of like looked at crazy now, right? If you have multiple generations in a home now, right, because of this sort of rugged individualism that we've all gotten this healthy dose of, which we know is a Eurocentric concept, we've begun to toss that aside. So I just so appreciate you bringing that up in the context of the conversation. Brother Troy, let's get you in here. From your perspective, your background, you've had a little bit of time to kind of get caught up in the convo, but this idea of community initiatives, grassroots movements playing a role in promoting Black liberation and well-being. Would love to get your thoughts on that, and then maybe any examples that maybe come to mind for our audience around, again, our rich history, our rich legacy. We're not coming to this thing empty-handed, and that we have the tools to heal ourselves. We'd love to get you in on that.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your patience with the technological issues. I know that Brother Richard had said something earlier that really stayed with me when you mentioned that tension or that dynamic between where do we go? Do we go towards a direction of integration, or do we head towards a place of perhaps nationalism, or what's that tension? And one of the lyrics that come to my mind, I think of Marvin Gaye in the What's Going On album, when he says, makes me want to holler the way they do my life. You listen to those lyrics, you hear some real pain. And so I come into this conversation as a child of the during the civil rights movement, when it was going on in the mid 60s, and just seeing that legacy and just looking at the challenges that we have faced structurally, being able to acknowledge this system of white supremacy and what it has done to us on a physical level, on a psychological level, on a cultural level. And so it's deep in terms of being able to look at that. And with my background in terms of human services, sociology, and now transitioning into diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think about one part that's often missing is that sense of belonging. And, how do you find a sense of belonging in a structure that wasn't designed for you? And as I see my young children, 8 and 9 years old, navigating in this system, it brings up the antenna and just everything that I've been thinking about over the years. It comes into play in terms of looking at what's the direction. How do you keep them grounded? How do you keep them moving forward and not just wanting to be a part of? Because what is there to be a part of? What I'm seeing is YouTube and TikTok and videos, people wanting their followers on social media, Kardashians, materialism, all of that. Those, I find myself just battling against that on a day-to-day level, to get off YouTube. Let's talk about some history. Let's talk about the movement. And it's a challenge. But in terms of, being able to resolve that, and I think if we look throughout history, we've seen places of people doing great things. We see efforts in terms of economic developments. We can certainly look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we see people being able to build up an economic infrastructure. In my very own neck of the woods in Boston, there was the Dudley Street Initiative, where people in Roxbury came together and started to acquire property, and actually using the tools that government uses to acquire property, such as eminent domain, and actually helping to build up home ownership in the inner city. There are certainly initiatives and things that we've been successful as. For me, the question becomes, how do we put it under the same tent? How do we put it under the same roof where we can actually bring divergent ideologies together so that the integrationists can sit across the table from the nationalists, and they'll be able to shake hands, break bread, and see their alliances, as opposed to dynamics where one is against the other and it becomes a wedge. I think we have to look at what is it that divides us. And I think if we have clarity in the goal, and if we can actually recognize that there is a division, not just within the United States, but on an international level. I often, on YouTube, I am blown away with brothers and sisters from Africa calling out their governments, calling out people giving their resources over for dollar bills, and going from the colonial system and going from what was a neo-colonial system to something else that's deeply entrenched. So there's so many things there, but I think we have to be able to see what is it that divides us and be able to resolve that. So I think that's a place of healing. The healing has to be external, but it also has to be internal. We have to be able to look at things like internalized self-hatred. What are those things about ourselves that we have a problem with? How do we resolve that? And how do we create a tent where we can bring that authentic love, where we can really build a genuine sense of community, not just based on ideology, not just based on position.
Powerful, powerful. Davon, were you going to jump in? I don't know if I saw.
Yeah, I could. So a couple things. I think in talking about like taking the conversation around Black liberation and all the things we've talked about, and thinking about like what it means to ground it in a call to action, right? Because I think context of this conversation, I think there are a lot of things, like specific things that we can point out, and I think we should. And I would start with two things. One is that particularly in the context of mental health in the industry that it's situated in, that there is a lack of general knowledge and understanding around the institutions that our communities lead that are providing the kind of approaches to addressing our issues that have been talked about in this conversation. And I think one of the things that we need is find ways to familiarize ourselves and our broader community with those institutions and organizations that are providing those kinds of services in our community. And that I think can, sounds like really simple, but I think it's tremendously important, particularly as a person that's engaged in like legislative advocacy and encountering the larger political systems. There are all kinds of public dollars that are invested in systems, services, programs that undermine the work that we're talking about here in this conversation, right? And that those resources will be better served being invested in the kinds of programs we're talking about today, which requires, greater levels of investment in these kind of community-based, Black-led organizations that carry the kind of worldview that we're talking about today. And I think very often, people feel a lot of distance from the kind of political process where the decisions around those resources go. But I think it's extremely important that in the absence of our engagement and some of those systems and environments where those decisions are made, other folks are filling in that void. And other folks are able to direct resources in the hands of those who, again, are engaged in an approach to providing services that further pathologize us, that further cause us harm, right? So I think that's something that's important. I think so. That's one piece. The second thing I would say is that when I think about the impact of the collective consciousness in this society around notions of white supremacy, notions of Black inferiority, one of the ways it shows up is that we as a community, and however sublimated it is, because I think for some of us it's not even conscious, but there's a way that the legitimacy of something is diminished if it's us doing it, right? And a part of what that does, and that has a variety of impacts, but one of its major impacts is that it causes us not to value the very technologies of healing that we know work in the context that we operate in. Right. So whether or not, for instance, I know, with the work that, myself and yourself and brother Baba Richard Rowe around African-centered rites of passage, right, as a technology of human and youth development, right, that we know works, right, that's marginalized from the mainstream. And I think there was a time where rites of passage was seen as like just a cute thing that they were doing over there, their enrichment thing over there, as opposed to an acknowledgement of the science behind it as a technology of human development. That is an extension of ancient technologies around human development that are more effective than the traditional European social science approach to human development, right? And so I think a part of it for us is to recognize in ourselves the ways in which, if we're doing it, right, if a Black person is doing it, it undermines our ability to see it as rigorous, as legitimate, as something that should garner like large scale institutional support and credibility. And so in order to accomplish the first thing that I mentioned, I think it requires doing some work in our community with saying, well, here's some specific, and I mentioned rights, but I'm sure there are many others. I know we talked about Dr. Elmer and Joanne Martin, right, and the development of the Black helping tradition, right, and the importance of spirituality in the Black helping tradition, right, and the work that they document that Black folks have done in terms of providing, the helping tradition in ways that social work has failed as a profession, as as an institutional practice, a way that it has failed. That institution has failed to serve our community in a way that the Black helping tradition was able to do, and so I think, but again, I think it requires us to be vigilant about engaging our community around the notion that we have things that are rigorous, that are effective, and that we don't need white folks' validation for it to be legitimate. And I think that's something that we got to stress in order to operationalize some of the approaches to addressing these problems that folks have already addressed here.
Davon, I so agree with you. I feel like I'm in the trenches, literally, because the education, the prevention, well, people that I see, we're way past that. It's pulling them up, showing them how to get up, and encouraging them to stay up. More and more, I'm seeing community clinics, psychiatrically based. I feel that it is incumbent upon me, if it's not true and of quality, I cannot work for that agency. There are there is their organization, the CARF organization now has programs that are called assertive community treatment organizations. And this is an organization where you go to your client's home or you're in the community with your client. You really get to know your client. And it's a 24/7 program. I've seen clients grow in this environment. I've also seen now insurance companies, because they've grown and they're not being hospitalized every 3 to 4 months, their insurance is being dropped or they're being moved to a lesser type care just when they're beginning to give you good eye contact or just when they're beginning to look at you or have a smile. I've not yet figured out a way how to address that. I do have the right to appeal and fight the insurance people, which I do. But sometimes they say, well, they can always come back. And that's interruption of care to me. So I feel like that I'm fighting all the time for that which is right, to help them see what is right about them. It's a good fight. It's a tiresome fight. But I do agree with you, Davon, having more in the community and being able to look at that. It is with much pride that I would like to say that this agency is a Black-owned agency, and this is what we offer, and this is how we do it. We can do it so much more. But money plays a big part in much that in caring for those that's in the trenches, so to speak.
No, this is powerful. There's so many different ways. I know we got to start moving towards conclusion here in a few minutes, unfortunately, but I mean, there's a million different places that we can go in this conversation. And again, I just thank you even for a few moments ago, Sister Hazel, around that symptoms versus flaws paradigm, which I think is absolutely critical. I think in your comments just now around it sounds like so often are fighting a solo battle, right? But I think about the idea of, again, you organizing, or so many of us that are in these professions, toiling by ourselves and like fighting this uphill battle. We got to bring other folks to the table with us. So that way we're not the ones fighting by ourselves. I think also about even a comment that Brother Troy made a little while ago around, his sons, right? Connecting that back to rites of passage and us needing to do the work to ensure that our folks understand, right, that we have tools at our disposal. But again, it starts with conversations like this, like, man, there's actually something we can do. There's actually the Afrocentric social work paradigm by Dr. Jerome Shealy, who's right here in Baltimore at Morgan State University, right? I also want to do one other thing before we start moving towards conclusion. I want to shout out brothers Adrian and Bert in the chat box. They got some amazing comments. I just want to shout out Brother Bert. I got Dr. Nzinga's book in my office right here that I grabbed at the last Sankofa conference in DC. It's a powerful book. It is a powerful book and framework, and really it's a workbook. It's a guidebook for all that we need to get done. But two pieces just so we start to tie together some of these. There's always going to be loose ends, y'all, but we working towards sewing them all up. And we not just talking about in this conversation, y'all. Um, I want to bring brother Troy back in, right? As a father, I want to, right? And then we're going to tie this back into Dr. Anissa, because these are arguably the two most important questions of all of this is around, right? You as a father, brother Troy, I immediately relate to you. I got two young sons. They're in the other room right now. They've actually been really, really good right now too. My 9-year-old, my 6-year-old are our two youngest. They part of my heart. Like I love these two black boys, two Muslim boys. So they got multiple identities as well. But from your vantage point as a father, I would love to hear your perspective on, knowing what you know, your training, your experience, your background. How does that come to bear in terms of you modeling positive and healthy parenting and fatherhood? And again, how that's absolutely critical as we talk about just building this culture of care across our community. Jump in there.
I think the biggest realization that I had that has helped me in the journey is that the parenting that I do today has to be a bit different than what my dad might have did in the 1970s. That the approach, and I have to be okay with adapting that approach. And that I think one of the things that is helping me the most in my fatherhood, and it's a realization that it's taken time, is to recognize how significant my wife is in the process. And I know that might seem very obvious, but I don't think that it's always put to practice in the way that we need to. And I know even in my introduction, I was intentionally in writing that I am in partnership in raising two boys. I recognize that it's not a matter of my way or the highway. James Evans cannot work for me now, in terms of good times, but I'm making that point to just say, recognizing that I have to be able to bring consistency. I have to be able to even just recognize what it means to nurture children, to nurture young boys, to be able to do more listening sometimes than talking, because I don't mind talking, but I really need to be able to listen to and hear what they're saying. And I also need to recognize, too, that it's so important that I model what it is that I want them to see, even when I don't think that they're observing, even when I don't think that they are seeing me. They are. They are. So I may not get a reaction. I may not get an immediate application by them to say, hey, Dad, I got it. But down the line, I realize that that's making the impact. My presence and just being able to listen and to know who they are and to really work to give them that unconditional love, because I'm learning you don't mold kids. You don't mold kids. I know sometimes, sometimes we might use that phrase, I'm trying to mold and shape. You're not molding. You're able to, at best be a vessel from God to help guide, to help share, but not, I'm not into the molding piece, because I think when you mold, you can misfigure. When you do too much molding, you can do damage that you don't even realize. So I try to be just thoughtful about my actions, and I make mistakes every day. But I think it's being able to be humble, and it's being able to, again, to go back to what I said before, work in partnership with my wife, and to recognize that it's not a competition. Mommy might get more hugs, in the process. I'm over that. That's fine. But I think it's being able to recognize the value of what it is that we bring to the table as fathers, even though society will try to erase us real quickly.
Oh, man. But brother, double, triple snaps, brother, and kudos. Let me say this really quickly. In the context of this conversation, interestingly enough, from an African-centered perspective on fatherhood and parenting, our job is to help our kids discover their destiny, their purpose on the planet. So what you're saying around this idea of, not molding is, I think, so critical, highly resonant, especially, today where they're receiving so much stimulation around a bunch of external opinions on what our kids should be, especially right when many of those perspectives are, again, from a capitalist or a Eurocentric perspective. So I appreciate that. And then a quick African proverb that's one of my favorites around fatherhood that you just spoke about. And then we'll get Dr. Anissa back in. But the proverb is that a child will know its mother through her breast, but the child will know their father via the mother. So your thought around partnership being critical and, the mother and the father being on one accord as we raise our children together, I think is just spot on. Dr. Anissa, let's bring you in from the perspective of, right, because you've spoken a number of times this evening, and I so appreciate it, around the preventative measures, around us building the tools that will allow the union of marriage, that will allow our mothers and fathers, our husbands and our wives to sustain, to support as the essential building block of the Black family, which then leads to the Black community. So I would love for you to speak on how some of your work is shaping up to be able to support marriages to sustain and last and be healthy. Because I didn't use that word. Not just any old marriage, but healthy marriages are critical to building healthy Black communities. If you could take us there.
Yes, thank you so much. And Brother Troy, thank you. Man, I felt all the warms and fuzzies hearing my brother talk about being in partnership with his wife. We don't hear that enough. We know that there are too many women trying to do this all by themselves, even if there is a man at home, and so thank you for being, in Islamic tradition, we call the qawwam, that maintainer, that protector, that, and the partnership is so important. So yes, as I said, prevention is, to me, is key, because I think, and my daughter and I work together. She's an attorney and I'm a social worker. We come together and we're saying that what the work that we're doing is trying to help people get the tools before, so they can fix themselves before they mess up their kids. Because I think that we don't realize that if we don't, before we even get married, because I work a lot with singles. I'm trying to, what I want to do is help single people choose wisely to make the right choices before they even get married. I think that so often, most of the times, we're marrying strangers. We're not marrying the boy or the girl next door, the kid on the block that we played hopscotch and, double dutch and stuff. In my day, that's what we did. That's not what we're doing today. And so we don't know each other, and we don't have the tools, and we don't have the foundation that we have. It's there, but we don't have it. Okay, so that means we got to go get it and bring it so that we can utilize it. And so that's what we do with the program and the work that we've been doing. It's, we've taken 13 weeks, 2 hours a night for 13 weeks. And most people don't want to give 13 weeks. We're a quick Burger King kind of society. So we're not taking 13 weeks to learn how to be married. Like, why do we need that? We don't have no problems yet. And I'm like, I guarantee you they will come. So do you have the skills to handle them when they get there? That is the question. Most people spend more time planning the wedding than they do planning the marriage. And so what we've been doing is working on trying to help people get the skills and the tools they need for a healthy marriage. Because I tell my students in my course all the time, you can get married, you can marry any old body, but is that of the person that is compatible with you, that's going to help you raise healthy children, have a loving, um, peaceful marriage and family life, or is that just somebody you're going to hook up with for a time and then you're done? That's not what we want. That's not our history. Okay. So if going back to earlier conversation about liberation, if the history you want is a history that is going to help us to be strong and viable together, then we've got to get those skills and tools. And so first question we ask is, who are you? How are you going to make a compatible decision if you don't even know who you are? you know um, and what are the qualities and characteristics? People come to me and say, as I said, in my community they call me Auntie Anissa. um, Auntie Anissa, do you know somebody? I want to get married. I'm like, well, tell me about yourself. What are you looking for? Oh, I'm just looking for somebody, good. I mean, they nice. And I'm like, okay, we need more. Like they haven't even given the thought. And so I know, I believe, and I don't have the history that maybe Davon has and some of you have, but I feel very strongly that historically there was a lot more family involvement in terms of helping to make those selections. And then, in the tribe, we were together. We got to see each other. We got to see what was going on, who people were, what their character was. We don't have that. Um, and of course, communication is key. It is like communication and financial issues are two of the biggest issues that will help break down a marriage. And in that is the stress and the mental health issues and all of those things that we want to prevent, right? And so, and we, in our course, we teach people about, mental health self-care, because if you as a person on taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of each other. You're not going to be able to have that healthy relationship that you need to build a healthy marriage and family life. If you have financial problems, you're going to be yelling at each other. Why are you doing this? And why you didn't bring home that? And why we don't have that? That's not helpful. That's not the thing. That's not healthy. And that's not what we want to be able to do. And I tell you, I got to this because I saw my parents and I saw what they went through and that they didn't have the tools. And I'm like, we can do better than this. If we have the tools, if we have the knowledge, the skills, the tools, we can do better than this. And so that's the work that I've been engaged in. And my hope is that, I have to say, sadly, and one of the things I'm working to do is to bring it more to our community. I'm part of a larger community, and I'm Muslim, and many people from other backgrounds, other brown folks from other backgrounds, are taking advantage of it. Our folks aren't. And so I don't know if that means I need to tell more people. I need to get out there and say, I don't know exactly. So I would welcome any guidance or suggestions that you may have. But I'm a strong believer in the need for this knowledge and to take the time. And I don't think 13 weeks is too much. We spend what, 3 years for law school. We spend, how many years for med school, and there's no way we would become a doctor without education. So why would we become a husband, a father without education? Why would we become a mother, a wife without education? I don't, to me, that's not logical. So
My sister, we
that's
follow our favorite reality shows for a lot longer than 13 weeks. So for one, I just celebrated 11 years of marriage earlier this month. Alhamdulillah. And yeah, it's work. I wish we would have did that 13 weeks. No, I'm just joking. I love her. We're doing great. But we're putting
but,
in the
but
work, though.
but let me
We're putting
say
in the
this.
work.
Let me say this. There's no problem, and I think it's something we don't even think about, that if we begin with some premarital education, premarital counseling, then that makes us ready for preventing things that are going to come up and recognizing, oh, okay, maybe this is time for a little booster shot. Let's go, let's get the help from our elders, get, the help that we need, the spiritual and or practical, okay, to be able to help us through that. So, yeah, I
Oh
think.
man. Thank you all so much. We're getting ready to move towards conclusion. We're going to head back to Baba Richard to close us out as the brother opened us up with really this one final question. And again, I thank all of our conversationalists for such an amazing and thoughtful conversation. Again, we peeled back several layers, so many more yet to go. Again, really honored to have been a part of this conversation. Baba Richard, take us home on this one. You and I, we talk a lot of time and have spent a lot of time in the past on visioning for the future and thinking about, this as yet to be realized future. But I would ask you, what would you say a future where, mental health equity, wellness is achieved within the Black community? What does that future look like? And what are some steps that, again, keeping in mind all of the steps that have already been shared this evening, but what are maybe some additional steps that maybe haven't been shared that we can start taking now towards that vision?
Brother Sadiq, powerful question, an amazing conversation you all. And again, where do you start? By the way, Sadiq, congratulations on celebrating 11 years. In January, I will celebrate my 35th year of being married to the same queen. 35 years. That not easy.
That's important, Bob Richard. 35 to the same woman, because we a couple of us can stitch together 35 years. So that's a good point.
And so how does one do that in this toxic environment where Black men and Black women have been programmed and taught to go at each other and to not like each other and not to love each other? So, Sister Nadir, you are doing important work, great work. 13 weeks is nothing. When a brother in the chat space said, how do you really deprogram a people who have undergone systemic racism for decades and centuries? How do you do that? Not easy. It's not going to be easy. But I would start in answering your question, Sadiq. And again, I was trying to take a few notes with what we are trying to achieve, creating this culture of care. What is that goal? Again, as I started in the beginning, what is the goal that we are in agreement with? And we're still struggling with that, even in 2023. And I'm quite sure it will confront us. I just finished watching the movie Rustin. Hard movie to watch to some extent, but I watched it. But for some of the important reasons that I think we all could gain from watching it. But 70 years ago, when they were trying to put the March on Washington, they were struggling with the same kinds of issues that we're struggling with. And if you ascribe to the Willie Lynch theory, whether you believe it historically or what have you, that is what has happened to us over the centuries. Find a way to divide a people that we kidnap and keep them divided forever. Keep them going at each other forever. And so Willie Lynch, of course, we understand his so-called paradigm. Pit the old against the young. Pit the female against the male, the light skin against the dark skin, hair texture, all those the things that can divide us and do divide us. Even today, we're still going at each other through through colorism. We basically, get upset. We have problems with just skin color and all that kind of stuff, even in 2023, but they were struggling with some of that stuff, some 70 years ago. So let me share this with everyone. I think we need a definition of what the culture of care is designed to create. And I think, as I said, Brother Sadiq and a few others in a pre-call, Dr. John Chazelle, who was a preeminent doctor here in Baltimore some years ago, gave us a definition of optimal mental health and well-being. And he simply said that it is the highest level of spiritual, physical, psychological, emotional, intellectual, and financial aliveness. Is that where we are striving to achieve? Should that be what we are trying to achieve for all of our people? If you relate or correlate that definition with the African philosophy of Ubuntu, if we can incorporate that African philosophy into our culture of care, Ubuntu, as we all know, I am because we are because I am, which speaks to the highest level of humanness. So of our culture of care, and amongst ourselves first, I mean, we have to really decide that what we're going to be doing in our creating our culture of care is all about what? All about creating a culture of care that helps us develop that ecosystem that brings everything that we've talked about together, that connects the dots, as I said earlier. If we can create that kind of culture of care that connects the dots, that incorporates, respect for the elders, honoring the elders, valuing, respecting the youth and our children, where family is essential, where there's no equivocation with regards to appreciating and institutionalizing all of our cultural artifacts. If we are doing that and including it and trying our best to make certain that all of those elements are part of this ecosystem, because we're not going to be able to do this with more programs. We've been basically programmed to think that developing more programs can go up against systems. Our culture of care can't be another program. It has to be include structures. It has to include ceremonies, rituals, practices, and everything that you need in order to go up against a system hell bent on destroying us 24/7, 365. And that's what we've been up against. And as Davon and some of you others said earlier, the fact that we're still here is a miracle. The fact that we're still in this conversation, relating to each other, caring about each other, talking about our children, talking about marriages, talking about loving and lifting up and illuminating our humanity, and really talking about how critical we are to each other. I think that is some of the key elements that I believe will be important as we continue to build this culture of care. But we need to really understand now, ain't gonna be easy. Dr. Nadir said something about 13 weeks. I have basically, and this might be controversial, but I said that Black folks for the next 10 years need to go inward. We spend so much time externalizing, so much time preoccupied with giving everybody our energy, our time, our talents, our treasures. We've been so busy doing that we have failed to really understand that our culture of care must be strength-based. It must be life affirming. It must be life saving. It also must be healing centered and transformational. If we can basically incorporate all of that into this notion of this culture of care for every single Black and brown person or Black person that we are basically focused on, I think that we can get this work done. 10 years of going inward without spending energy on trying to get validation from white folks, I mean, would be a miracle in and of itself, because we have spent most of our time, as we've said on this call, trying to get their validation, or trying to seek their validation. And as a result, we are still woefully dependent and woefully, woefully dependent on them economically, and woefully dependent on them from a psychological standpoint. Some of us, not all of us, but some of us. So again, those are some of the things that I would basically place on the table for consideration. Intergenerational is key in terms of relating to one another. Culture is very important. Understanding, appreciating our cultural artifacts. Um, Identity is in terms of making sure that we're clear about who we are and whose we are. That's still sometimes a mystery to some of us. Education and all those things that we've all talked about. So I'll leave it there. But I think that if we could basically appreciate or consider some of the things that I've just shared, we would move closer to creating this culture of care, short term and long term, because this is really about the long term journey that we're all on.
That's right. Baba Richard, thank you so much conversationalists. We're going to have to leave it here, unfortunately. But thank you all so much for all of your words, your sharing, your passion, your thoughts, your ideas, and your challenges for us to go inward, for us to remember, for us to, again, continue to change our minds about each other, our own capabilities, for us to continue to look through ourselves through a different lens, the lens that is ours, of our creation, of our design, and our own image. We got a lot of work to do, y'all, but the good news is we got all the tools, we got all we need in order to get that work done. So I'm so excited and, again, honored to have participated in this conversation. And, again, so much more to come. Peace and blessings.